The alert didn't sound like the end of the world. It sounded like my phone deciding, at 4:47 in the morning, that whatever I was dreaming about mattered less than whatever the government needed to say. A flat, mechanical shriek that cut through the cab of my truck like a blade through wet cardboard. I jerked upright so hard, I cracked my elbow against the steering wheel. And for about 3 seconds, I sat there, with my heart doing something violent inside my chest, trying to remember where I was and why I was sleeping in a vehicle instead of a bed. The where came back first: rest stop off I-40, somewhere between Amarillo and Nowhere, Texas. The why took longer, and when it arrived without drama, which was somehow worse than if it had felt important. I was sleeping in my truck because I didn't have anywhere else to sleep. No apartment, no lease, no forwarding address. I'd left Nashville 6 weeks ago with everything I owned in the bed under a tarp. And since then I'd been moving west the way water moves downhill. Not because I'd chosen the direction, but because stopping required a reason and I hadn't found one yet. I looked at the screen. Emergency alert, civil emergency. This is not a test. Reports of violent attacks across multiple counties. Avoid populated areas. Seek shelter immediately. Await further instruction. I read it 3 times. The alert format was the same one they used for tornadoes and flash floods. The language was different. Violent attacks wasn't weather. Await further instruction wasn't a time frame. I sat there in the dark cab with the screen light fading, and I did what most people probably did when they read it. I assumed it was a localized thing, a riot, a gas leak, some contained, manageable event that civic infrastructure would handle by morning. I set the phone face down on the passenger seat and rubbed my eyes. Then I heard the sound from the parking lot, not loud. That was the part that reached me first, the specific quality of the sound being wrong in its volume, not its nature. A low, dragging friction, like something heavy being moved across asphalt by someone who couldn't quite lift it. I looked through the windshield. The rest stop had a main building with bathrooms and a vending machine alcove, a dog walk strip along the east edge, and a row of parking spaces that held, at this hour, 2 semi-trucks at the far end, and my pickup in the middle. There were 3 overhead lights. One was dark. The second flickered with the specific rhythm of a bulb that had been dying for months. Under the third, a man was walking. I say walking, but that isn't right. Walking implies purpose and alignment between thought and movement. What this man was doing was something the body does when the brain has lost its negotiating position. He was moving forward in the way a machine moves when its governor is broken. No modulation, no adjustment. Just forward motion in the direction the last signal had sent him. His right arm hung in a way that suggested the shoulder joint had been compromised. His head was tilted 11 degrees to the left. He crossed through the light, and I saw his face. And I want to be precise here because vagueness would be dishonest. His expression was the absence of one. Not blank the way a sleeping person is blank. Blank the way a surface is blank. Like the capacity for expression had been removed rather than suppressed. He walked past the front of my truck without looking at it. I didn't move. I don't know if that was instinct or paralysis. And I've spent considerable time since then trying to determine which. And I've decided it doesn't matter. I stayed still. He kept moving. He walked past the second semi and into the dark beyond the reach of the last working light, and then he was gone. I picked up my phone. I opened the browser. The page loaded slowly and then stopped loading. I tried a different site. Same result. The network was alive enough to receive alerts and dead enough to offer nothing else. I started the engine. Not because I had a plan, because the alternative was sitting still. And sitting still in that parking lot suddenly felt like a decision I didn't have the nerve to make. I pulled out of the rest stop at 4:53 a.m. and turned east, which was the direction I'd come from, which tells you something about my mental state. I'd spent 6 weeks moving west, and my first instinct under pressure was to reverse. I caught that after about 2 miles, recognized it for what it was, regression dressed up as motion, and pulled onto the shoulder. The highway was empty. Not the ordinary empty of 4 in the morning on a weeknight, where you might see a semi every 10 minutes, and an occasional set of headlights heading the opposite direction, empty in a way that had texture to it, a stillness that felt imposed rather than incidental. I sat with the engine idling and tried the radio. AM first. Static on most channels, then a station out of Amarillo that was broadcasting an automated loop. The same emergency language from the alert, read by a computer voice in the tone of a parking ticket. FM gave me 3 stations playing music and one playing a preacher who'd apparently been on the air long enough to pivot his sermon toward the evening's events without quite admitting he didn't know what they were. I turned it off. My name is Cody Vass. I'm 29 years old. For the past 4 years, I worked in commercial HVAC installation, mostly in Tennessee and Kentucky. And I was decent at it in the way you get decent at something when you do it every day without caring about it. I'm not telling you this because it becomes relevant in some tactical way. I want to be honest that my skill set, at the moment the world changed, was limited to ductwork and sheet metal fabrication and a secondary ability to read a building's mechanical systems. I was not a survivalist. I had no weapons beyond a folding knife I'd owned for 7 years and a tire iron in the truck bed. I had a camping stove I'd used twice, a sleeping bag, a duffel bag of clothes, a toolbox, and approximately $60 in cash, plus whatever was left on a debit card attached to an account I'd been quietly draining for 6 weeks. I was, in every practical sense, the worst possible person to be on the road, alone, when something like this happened. I tell you that not as self-pity, but as fact. Some people are built for crisis the way certain metals are built for heat. Their structure holds, their properties improve under pressure. I was not one of those people. I knew that about myself. I'd spent most of my adult life in the specific territory between wanting to matter and not being sure I deserved to. And the result was a kind of permanent half-engagement with everything: relationships, work, geography, future. I was always partially somewhere else. The truck moving west had been an expression of that. Not running toward anything, just refusing to stay in a place that reflected back a version of me I didn't know how to fix. I thought about all of this sitting on the shoulder of I-40 at 5 in the morning with a dead internet connection and one man's ruined walk replaying behind my eyes. Then a pair of headlights appeared coming east, moving fast. A white pickup, newer than mine, doing somewhere around 90. It blew past me and I watched its taillights shrink, and I thought about the direction it was going, away from Amarillo, toward Tucumcari, toward open space, and before I'd made a conscious decision, I was pulling back onto the highway following it. Not chasing. Just using it the way you use a boat in front of you, on open water, letting the fact of its motion provide a temporary answer to the question of which way to go. I followed those lights for 11 miles before they turned south onto a county road and disappeared. I kept going east. The first truck stop I came to was lit, but the lot was wrong. 6 vehicles in spaces, and none of them had people in them. But all of them had their doors open. Not one door ajar, not 2. Every door of every vehicle standing open, like they'd all been evacuated in the same 30-second window. I slowed to a crawl passing the entrance, didn't pull in, kept moving. At 5:41 a.m., I came up behind a car that was stopped in the right lane with no hazards and no one visible inside it. I went around it. By the time the sun started threatening the horizon, I had a count of 7 abandoned vehicles and no living people, and one more figure walking, this one a woman, on the shoulder facing west, moving with the same broken governor quality as the man at the rest stop. I didn't stop. I drove, and the highway kept unreeling in front of me, and I still had no destination, and now I had no easy explanation for what I was driving away from. The first person I found who was still themselves was at a gas station outside a town called Adrian, which sits almost exactly at the midpoint of Route 66 if you're measuring from Chicago to Los Angeles, and which had a population of around 150 people on a normal day. The gas station was a single-pump operation attached to a building that sold souvenirs and meat sticks and postcards celebrating the road's mythology. The pump was off. The lights were on inside. I parked at the edge of the lot and watched for a full 3 minutes before I got out. Inside, behind the counter, was a girl maybe 19 or 20 sitting on a bar stool with her back to the wall and a fire extinguisher across her knees. She looked at me when I came through the door with the specific expression of someone who has spent the last hour performing constant threat assessment and has not yet found a category to put me in. "You bite anybody recently?" she said. It wasn't quite a question. "No." "You feel weird? Fever? Confusion? Anything like that?" "I feel scared," I said. "Does that count?" She looked at me for another long moment. "It counts as honest," she said. "That's something." She set the fire extinguisher down beside the stool, but didn't move it out of reach. "Dara," she said. "Cody. You come from west?" "Rest stop about 60 miles back. Before that, Nashville. But that's a longer story." "Nashville's gone," she said. It came out flat, not cruel. The way you say something when you've already processed the information, and what's left is just the fact of it. "My cousin texted me from Memphis at 11 last night. Then nothing." "Gone how?" "Gone like here, but worse. Here is bad enough." She nodded toward the window. "Town's got maybe 30 people in it on a given night, and I've seen 12 of them walking wrong since about 3 this morning. My boss drove away about an hour before you showed up. Took the register cash and didn't say anything to me. Just drove." She paused. "East. There's somewhere east worth driving to?" That's the question, isn't it? She wasn't asking. She was pointing at the shape of the problem, the same way I'd been poking at it since the highway went empty. I looked around the store. Shelves with road trip provisions, crackers, jerky, candy, sunscreen, 2 wire racks of souvenirs, a cooler in the back with drinks. A door behind the counter I assumed led to a back room or storage. It wasn't a survivable position long term. Too much glass, 1 entrance, no second floor. "You planning to stay here?" I asked. I was planning to stay here until someone came through who seemed like a better option than staying here, she said. She looked at me with an evaluating directness that made me simultaneously uncomfortable and grateful for its honesty. "You have a vehicle?" "Pickup, runs." "You know where you're going?" "No." She nodded slowly, like that answer had confirmed something she'd suspected. "I have a cousin in Albuquerque. I've been trying to reach her for 2 hours. She's not answering, but she was alive at 10 o'clock last night because she posted a photo of her dinner. She said this the way people state the last reliable data point on a subject, not as evidence of continued safety, but as the marker where known information ended." "That's a direction," I said. "It's the only one I have." "Then it's the one we've got." She studied me for another 4 or 5 seconds in a way that felt like a final audit. Then she stood up and moved behind the counter and came out with a backpack already loaded, which meant she'd been assembling it before I arrived. She'd been waiting for a direction and preparing for departure simultaneously. I noted that and filed it. She was better at this than she was letting on, or better at it than she knew she was. And either way, she was already more useful than the $60 version of me that had woken up to an alert 40 minutes earlier. "One rule," Dara said, slinging the pack. "Okay. If I say stop, you stop. I've been watching them move for 3 hours, and I notice things. You do what I say when I say it, and we don't debate the logic until after." "Deal," I said. She picked up the fire extinguisher, reconsidered, put it back down. She grabbed a long-handled ice scraper from a rack by the door instead. I did not point out that this was not a particularly formidable weapon, because the way she held it told me she'd already made that calculation and decided it was better than nothing. And she was right. We walked out into the early light together. Adrian had 2 main streets and a water tower with the town's name in fading paint and a quality of silence that was different from the highway's silence because it was a silence built on top of what should have been morning sound. Birds, a dog somewhere, someone's radio, the acoustic furniture of a small place waking up. None of that was present. The silence was structural, load-bearing. It held the town's shape while the town's life was elsewhere. We moved to the truck fast without running, which was Dara's instruction. "Running triggers the ones that are mobile," she said quietly as we crossed the lot. "The ones that are standing still, you don't know yet what triggers them, so don't find out." "How do you know about running?" "I watched one of them chase a jackrabbit at 3:15 a.m., she said. The rabbit cut left, and the thing ran straight for another 150 feet before it stopped. Motion triggered, straight line pursuit, limited course correction. I absorbed this. She'd spent the last 2 hours doing what I'd been doing on the highway, but with more systematic attention to what she was seeing. I filed that too. We reached the truck. I unlocked it. We got in, and I started the engine, and Dara immediately rolled her window down. 2 inches, and held her hand up. "Wait." I waited. She was listening. After 30 seconds, she lowered her hand and I pulled out. The eastern edge of Adrian had a figure standing in the center of the road, about 200 yards out. Male, older, wearing a flannel shirt, facing away from us. I reduced speed. Dara watched it through the windshield with the focused patience of someone who'd been studying a subject and was now applying findings. "Speed up slowly," she said. "Steady acceleration, no sudden noise. Get past before it turns." I did exactly what she said. We passed within 30 feet, and the figure didn't turn. I brought the truck back up to highway speed, and we cleared the town limits, and I exhaled a breath I'd been holding since I spotted it. "Does it bother you," I said, "that you're already that good at reading them?" She was quiet for a moment. "It bothers me that I had to get good at it alone," she said. "It would have bothered me more if I hadn't." That landed somewhere specific. The difference between the thing that frightened you and the thing that would have been worse. I understood that arithmetic personally in a context that had nothing to do with infected people walking wrong on country roads, and I didn't say so, but I thought about it for the next 20 miles. The highway to Albuquerque from the Texas-New Mexico border was a straight shot, 170 miles, through terrain that was flat enough to give you visibility for half a mile in any direction and empty enough that we went 40 minutes without seeing anything moving except wind-pushed scrub. I found that I was scanning both shoulders automatically, the way you scan intersections for cross-traffic, cataloging moving shapes versus static ones. I'd been doing it since the rest stop. My brain had started sorting the world into 2 categories, and I hadn't consciously chosen to let it. Dara was doing the same thing, I noticed. Not anxiously, methodically. "Tell me about your cousin," I said. Partly because I wanted information, and partly because the silence was acquiring a weight that needed interrupting. "Yolanda," she said. "She's 24. She works at a hospital. That's actually why I'm worried about her specifically. She wouldn't have evacuated if there were patients." She paused. "Yolanda doesn't leave. Loyal. Stubborn," she said. "But in the direction of loyalty, yeah." I thought about the people I'd left in Nashville. Not dramatically, not as a rehearsed grief, just the factual catalog of them. My friend Marcus, who'd texted me twice in 6 weeks, and I hadn't fully answered either time. My former boss Ray, who'd given me the truck as a write-off when I left the company and probably hadn't expected me to still be living in it in November. My mother, who called on Sundays and had stopped leaving voicemails because I didn't return those either. None of them were Yolanda. None of them were people I was driving toward. The sun was fully up now, and the desert was doing what it does in early morning light, making you briefly believe that clarity and openness were the same as safety. They weren't. But I let myself believe it for the time it took the speedometer to reach 70 and hold. We hit the first serious obstruction 40 miles west of Santa Rosa, New Mexico, where someone had pulled 2 cars horizontally across both lanes of I-40 and stood on the shoulder with a shotgun. Not a law enforcement officer, a civilian in work boots and a canvas jacket, maybe 50, with the kind of stillness that comes from having already decided what he was willing to do. I slowed to a stop about 70 feet back. "Don't get out," Dara said immediately. "I'm not." The man watched us. He didn't raise the weapon. He waited with it. "He's not infected," I said. "No," she agreed. "He's scared and he has a gun, and he built a wall and we're on the wrong side of it." Through the windshield, I could see that the blockade had been here long enough for someone to have pushed a third car behind the first 2, staggering them so no vehicle could slide through without hitting one. There was deliberate thought in that arrangement. A measured response from someone who'd had enough time to stop reacting and start planning. I rolled my window down slowly and put my hand out, open, palm forward. The man didn't move. "We're looking for a way through to Albuquerque," I called. Not aggressive, not pleading, factual. "Road's closed," the man said. His voice carried easily in the morning quiet. "Closed by you or closed by something ahead?" A pause. That was the pause of someone recalibrating what kind of conversation this was. "Both," he said finally. I looked at Dara. She gave a small head shake. "Don't push yet." "You live out here?" I called. "My property's 2 miles north," he said. "My wife and my son are on it. I'm out here keeping people from bringing trouble back with them." "I understand that," I said. "We're not trouble. We don't need anything from you except information and passage." Another pause. He shifted his weight, not threateningly. "Processing." "What's your destination?" he called. "Albuquerque, University District. We're looking for someone." The word someone seemed to matter to him in a way I hadn't anticipated. His posture changed in a small but specific way, a slight easing around the shoulders. He'd been watching vehicles all morning, I realized. Vehicles moving, not people looking for someone. The distinction meant something to him. "The highway ahead has a pileup about 8 miles out," he said. "Multi-car, bad one. You can't get through it without backtracking. There's a county road 2 miles east that runs south and then west. It's longer, but it's clear as of 2 hours ago." He paused again. When I checked it. "Thank you," I said. He watched us for a moment. "The girl with you," he said, not unkindly. "She local?" "No, Texas." He nodded slowly, like that explained something. "You look out for her," he said. I started to say something automatic, something about how she was handling herself fine, and stopped. Because the instruction wasn't a comment on Dara's competence. It was an older man talking to a younger man across a blockade in the middle of a collapsing world and offering the only version of encouragement available to him in that moment. "You look out for her" meant don't let this be the thing you fail at. "I will," I said. He stepped aside from the shoulder and pointed east with 2 fingers. I reversed and turned around and found the county road where he said it was. We drove in silence for a few minutes. Then Dara said, "You were going to correct him." "Yeah." "But you didn't." "He needed to believe there was something worth instructing," I said. "Didn't seem like a good time to take that from him." She looked out her window. "That might be the most useful thing I've heard all day," she said. The county road ran south through scrubland that looked abandoned in the specific way of land that's never been fully claimed. No structures, no fencing, just pale dirt and low vegetation and the occasional concrete foundation with no building on it. We drove for 20 minutes without seeing a living thing of any kind, which should have been reassuring and wasn't. The absence of the infected was a different kind of information than their presence. And I'd already started treating silence as a variable rather than a default. Dara spent most of this stretch on her phone, cycling through every app and news outlet she could still partially access. The network was degraded, but not dead. She'd get 20 seconds of load time and then nothing, or a headline without a story behind it, or a live feed that buffered for 3 minutes before dropping. "What are you getting?" I asked. "Fragments," she said. "Dallas is apparently significant. Someone's national news feed has a single update from 40 minutes ago. CDC advising shelter in place nationwide. There's a Twitter thread from a doctor in Phoenix that stopped mid-thought at 3 a.m. She paused, still scrolling. "There's a lot of posts that are just one word. Same word, different accounts." "What word?" "Don't." She lowered the phone. "Just don't. No follow-up, like people got as far as the warning and no further." I thought about what that implied, about the speed of the thing, the gap between the start of a sentence and the end of it being enough time for everything to change. I thought about the woman at the rest stop walking west. I thought about the alert shrieking at 4:47 and the man under the parking light with his shoulder wrong. And how much had already been in motion before any system existed to report on it. "What's the doctor's account say before 3 a.m.? I asked. She was posting about patients in the ER agitation, elevated temperature, then rapid deterioration. She says the transition took 11 minutes. She uses the word transition 3 times. Dara set the phone down. She's a good writer, very precise. She was posting all the way up to the point where she stopped, and the posts don't accelerate or become panicked. They just stop. The precision of that, the absence of panic in the record, struck me as both admirable and devastating. I filed it under the category of things I didn't know how to think about yet. We rejoined I-40 west of the pileup, and the road opened up again. I could see the obstruction in my rear view. A dark cluster of shapes in the distance that at 60 miles an hour receded quickly. And something in me was grateful to be moving fast enough for things to recede. Dara's phone buzzed. She looked at it, and her body changed not dramatically, but in the way a building changes when a load-bearing element shifts. She went still in a way that was different from her earlier stillness. "Yolanda?" I asked. "Her roommate, Maya," she said. She was reading. Her lips moved slightly on one word, and then stopped. "Maya says Yolanda went in for her shift last night and hasn't come back. The hospital is..." She stopped reading and looked at the road ahead. "Maya says you can hear the hospital from 3 blocks away." I didn't ask what that meant. We both knew what that meant. Dara kept her eyes forward for a long time. Then she made a sound that wasn't crying, it was too controlled for that, and said, "I need you to not say anything reassuring right now." "Okay," I said. "Not because I think you're wrong, just because I can't use it yet." "I understand," I said. She put the phone face down on her knee and looked at the landscape moving past. I drove at 70 and didn't fill the silence with anything, because she'd told me exactly what she needed, and the most useful thing I could do was provide it. The specificity of that, the precision with which she'd named her need, was something I'd spent years being incapable of. I noted it without comment and drove. 40 minutes outside Albuquerque, we started seeing smoke. 3 separate columns, different parts of the visible horizon. The kind of fires that don't start accidentally and don't get put out quickly. The sky ahead had a brown-gray tint layered under the regular blue that told me the fires had been burning long enough to change the air. "She's probably not at the hospital anymore," Dara said. She wasn't talking to me, exactly. She was constructing a framework she could operate inside. The hospital got bad fast. She would have moved. She's smart. She's careful. She knows how to move through a city. She would have gone to Maya. "Where's Maya?" I asked. "Near campus, UNM. They've been roommates for 2 years. "Then that's where we go first." Dara looked at me. Not with gratitude, or not only with gratitude. There was something evaluating in it still. A continued audit she hadn't yet concluded. "You don't have to come into the city with me," she said. "You could drop me at the edge." "I know," I said. "That would be the rational choice." "I know that too," I said. She waited. "I don't have anywhere else to be," I said. "And that's not entirely the reason, but it's part of it, and I'd rather be honest about the part than make it sound better than it is." She looked at me for one more moment, then forward again. "Okay," she said. "That works." Albuquerque from the highway looked like a city in the process of being sorted into before and after, and you could see both versions simultaneously from elevation. The western districts looked mostly intact from a distance, lights still on in some areas, traffic signals running on their usual cycle even with no traffic to direct. The eastern end, toward the university and the medical corridor, was where the smoke was thickest, and where you could see, even at highway distance, patterns of movement on the surface streets that didn't match normal traffic behavior. I took the exit Dara directed me toward and dropped to surface streets at about 30 miles an hour, which was the speed that felt like a compromise between the two bad options of moving too fast to react and moving slow enough to be noticed. The neighborhood near UNM was residential. Older houses converted to student rentals, tall trees, street parking. It had been a living neighborhood 12 hours ago. Now it had the feeling of a stage set, props all in place, cast absent. Cars at the curb, a bike still locked to a signpost, a porch light still burning over a door standing open. The open door was the worst detail. It meant someone had left in the direction away from that door, with enough urgency that the door hadn't been worth closing. "The building is white with a green door. Second block past the light," Dara said. She was watching both sides of the street with the compact, focused attention I'd already come to recognize as her operating mode. I found it, parked 2 houses back rather than directly in front. She was already out before I'd fully stopped, moving at that fast, not running pace. And I got out and followed because there was no version of dropping her here that I could live with. The green door was closed. Dara knocked in a specific pattern, short, pause, long, and we waited. Footsteps. A pause at the door. Then a female voice, young and taut. "Who is it?" "Maya, it's Dara." The door opened fast, and a woman 20s, small-framed, wearing a surgical mask and holding a bread knife, pulled Dara inside and then looked at me. "He's with me," Dara said. Maya looked at me for 3 seconds, then stepped back. I came in. She closed the door, and I heard 2 locks and a deadbolt engage. The apartment was a first-floor unit with the windows already covered, bed sheets taped over the glass, enough to block line of sight from outside while letting thin light through. 3 backpacks in the front hall, preloaded, arranged in order of priority, I assumed, based on their placement. Maya had been preparing this space. She was operating on a similar logic to Dara's, methodical, low panic, orienting toward the next necessary action. "Yolanda?" Dara said. Maya's face did something complicated. "She called me from the hospital at 2 a.m., she said. "She got out. She was heading here." She paused in a way that had geometry to it. She was deciding how much of what came next to deliver at once. "She's here. She's upstairs. Dara." She stopped again. "Say it," Dara said. Her voice was level in a way that took effort. "She made it here," Maya said carefully. "She got here about an hour ago, and she's still herself, fully herself, talking, coherent. She recognized me immediately. She remembered things." She stopped. "But she was bitten on the way here, on her forearm. She's contained it as best she can. She's upstairs in the bathroom with the door locked from the inside." A pause. "She locked it herself." The 3 of us stood in the covered window light, and the information settled into the room like a physical weight taking up the available space. Dara's breathing didn't change. "How long ago?" she said. "About 70 minutes, Maya said. "She says she's still herself. She checks in through the door every 10 minutes. Last check was 4 minutes ago." Dara looked at me. I looked back at her. The audit in her eyes was still running. I went upstairs because Dara needed to be the one at the door, and having all 3 of us in the hallway felt like too much pressure applied to a space that needed to breathe. I sat on the top step and listened to Dara talk to her cousin through the locked bathroom door. And I will tell you that I did not understand, until that moment, what it costs a person to hold their voice absolutely steady. "Yo-yo," Dara said. "It's me." "I know your knock." Yolanda's voice came through the door. Warm, present. That was the thing that was devastating about it, how fully present she sounded. "How are you feeling?" "Still me," Yolanda said. "Still completely me. I'm timing it. I've been reading about the transition from what I saw at the hospital. The average onset window from bite to full transition in the cases I observed was between 90 minutes and 3 hours. I have somewhere in the middle of that window left, probably." A pause. "I'm not scared, Dee. I want you to know that. I'm genuinely not scared." "Okay," Dara said. "I need you to listen to me carefully," Yolanda said. "I need to tell you some things while I'm still me enough to tell them. I'm listening." "There's a cooler in the hall closet with a week of food that I carried up from the hospital commissary last night before things went bad. It's worth more than anything else in this apartment. There are also 6 boxes of medical supplies in the bottom of my closet that I brought out 3 hours before the hospital was overrun. Antibiotic packs, wound care, pain management. I knew it was going to go. I prepared." A pause. "I prepared for you to come, Dara. I knew you would come." I heard Dara's breath catch just once and then steady. "There's a man in the city named Garrett Osei," Yolanda continued. "He's a veterinarian. He runs a triage operation out of a community center on Cole Avenue. He's the best person I encountered today. He will take you in, and you will be an asset to him, and he will be an asset to you." She paused. "Take Maya, and whoever Dara brought. I could hear there were 2 of you on the stairs." I looked at my hands on my knees. "You heard me up here?" I said, loud enough to carry. "I'm a light sleeper and the building has thin floors," Yolanda said. "And I've been listening very hard to everything for the last several hours, because I'm a nurse and paying attention is what I do." A pause. "Are you taking care of my cousin?" "I'm trying," I said. "Try harder," she said. Not unkindly. The same way the man with the shotgun had said, look out for her, not as a criticism, but as the most important directive available to give. "Yes, ma'am," I said. A short silence. Then Yolanda said to Dara, "I want you to leave before the window closes. I mean it. Don't be here for the change. Remember me exactly as I am right now. I am asking you to do that for me." "Yo-yo?" "I am asking," she said again, gently but with the weight of someone who has already made her peace with the specific shape of what's coming. "I need to know that you left while I was still me. That is the last thing I need." Dara put her palm flat against the door. I saw it from the stairs. She held it there for a long time. "I love you," she said. "I know," Yolanda said. "I love you. Now go." We were out of the building in 4 minutes. Dara moved through the apartment collecting the things Yolanda had directed us toward with a focused efficiency that I recognized as a coping strategy in real time. Her grief was still inside her, but she'd found a container for it in the form of Yolanda's instructions. And she was following those instructions with the same precision her cousin had given them. I took the cooler. Maya took the backpacks. Dara took the medical supply boxes in 2 trips. None of us spoke while we loaded the truck. The street was still clear, but the quality of the silence had changed in the hour since we'd arrived. It had the specific density of a space that had recently had something in it that was no longer there. Sound had been here. Now it wasn't. Maya sat in the middle seat with her hands in her lap and her surgical mask pulled down around her chin. She'd used it as a filter against the smoke, I realized. Not as pathogen protection, the infection wasn't airborne. Or if it was, no one had established that yet. And she was making practical decisions with imperfect information, the same way the rest of us were. "Cole Avenue," I said. "I know where it is," Maya said. "I went to UNM for 3 years. Take Central East about a mile, then south." I pulled out. Moving was better than stopped. I'd established that much as a personal truth. "The vet," I said. "Garrett Osei. How did Yolanda know him?" "She mentioned him once, a few weeks ago," Maya said. "She said she'd treated one of his patients from an animal bite, and they talked in the waiting room for an hour. She said he was the kind of person who would be useful when things went wrong." Maya paused. "I thought it was a weird thing to say about someone you just met." "It wasn't," Dara said. She was looking out the side window. "I know that now," Maya said quietly. Central Avenue was one of the main arteries through the city, and it was the first urban street I'd driven since the night before, and the contrast with the highway was stark. The highway's problems had been spatial empty space, isolated incidents. The city's problems were density. Not overrun, not yet, but populated with wrong movement in enough places that my navigation required constant, split-second sorting. A figure crossing an intersection 2 blocks north, and I altered the route. A cluster of 3 near a bus stop at the next block, and I went around. It was like threading a needle, except the needle moved and the thread had no end. Dara was doing the sidewalk assessment the whole way. She'd stopped verbalizing it and had moved to a pointing system. 2 fingers right meant thread on the right at the noted distance. 1 finger down meant stop and wait. Flat hand forward meant clear to proceed. I'd adapted to it within 2 blocks without us negotiating it. "We work well together," I said, not entirely meaning to say it aloud. "Don't celebrate it yet," she said. "We've been together for 2 hours." "3," I said. "3," she allowed. Maya watched this exchange and said nothing. The community center was a converted brick building set back from the street with a parking lot that had been rearranged cars pushed into a perimeter barrier formation. Deliberate. The same logic as the man with the shotgun on the county road, but with more resources and more organization behind it. There was a manned position at the entrance. 2 people, neither of them armed visibly, but standing in a way that suggested there was something behind them that was. I pulled up slowly and stopped. Same routine as before, window down, hands visible, patient. A tall man in his 40s came forward from the position. He had the kind of build that suggested physical work done consistently over years, rather than gym architecture. And he moved with the spare deliberateness of someone for whom efficiency was a habit. "You have injuries," he said. "No," I said. "Anyone in the vehicle bitten or exposed?" "No." He looked at all 3 of us in a single sweeping assessment. "You have supplies?" "A week of food and medical supplies," I said. "We were directed here by Yolanda Reyes." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite grief, something before grief. "She sent you," he said. "Yes." He stepped back from the car and said something to the person behind him, then turned back. "Pull in," he said. "My name is Garrett Osei. You're expected." The community center held 31 people when we arrived, which was a number Garrett gave us unprompted during the first 5 minutes, along with its implications. 34 with our addition. Current food to last 8 days at full ration. Water from the building's 300-gallon emergency reserve, plus ongoing access to a functional well 2 properties north, and a perimeter that had held for 6 hours and shown 3 attempted breaches, all repelled without injury. He gave us this information standing in the building's main hall while people moved behind him with the organized purpose of a community that had already done the work of agreeing on its structure. There were no visible arguments, no clusters of people standing apart from the group in the body language of dissent. Either they'd resolved their conflicts before we arrived, or Garrett was very good at creating an environment where conflict resolved itself before it visibilized. "Yolanda is gone," Dara said. She said it to Garrett directly, not to the room. And he received it with the stillness of someone absorbing a weight they'd been expecting to carry. "When?" he said. "About 45 minutes ago. She sent us here with what she knew." He nodded once, slowly. "She called me from the hospital last night," he said. "She told me that if things went the way she thought they would, she'd make sure anyone who came out of her building came here. She was very specific about that." He paused. "She was very specific about most things." "Yes," Dara said. "I'm sorry," he said. And he meant it in the specific way of someone who knew exactly what they were sorry for and wasn't using the words as a placeholder. Dara nodded and looked away. And that was the end of that portion of the conversation. He gave us jobs within the first hour. Not because he was asserting authority, because having jobs was how the community had organized its stability and integration into the structure, was the mechanism by which trust was established. Maya, with her 2 years of chemistry coursework, went to the supply inventory team. Dara, with her 3 hours of field observation and pattern recognition, went to the perimeter monitoring team, which was exactly the right deployment and said something about Garrett's ability to read people quickly. Me, with my HVAC background, he walked to the building's mechanical room. "The generator runs on diesel," he said. "We have 40 hours of fuel. The building has a rooftop HVAC unit that hasn't run in 6 months, and I don't know why. If you can get it running, we can manage the air quality in the main hall without the windows, which means we don't need to manage the windows as a perimeter point. I looked at the unit. An older commercial system, not unlike ones I'd worked on, with a failed capacitor in the start circuit I could tell from the burned smell before I even opened the panel. A capacitor failure was a fixable problem if I had the component. And when I said so, Garrett produced a supply bin of electrical spares that told me either he'd pre-staged this facility well or someone before him had prepared it for something. "There's a bin for each system in the building," he said. "I purchased this building 8 months ago. I had it stocked 4 months ago." I looked at him. "Yolanda thought you'd waited for something to go wrong," I said carefully. "She thought you were a reactive planner." "She thought many things about me correctly," he said. "And one thing incorrectly. I'm not reactive." He said it without pride, just calibration. I read a paper 18 months ago from a pair of epidemiologists at UNM Pattern Recognition paper. The kind that doesn't make headlines, but makes anyone who reads it very quiet for a few days. He paused. "I bought this building the following month." I held the burned capacitor in my hand and looked at the man who'd been waiting for the thing that had arrived. "Why tell me this?" I asked. "Because you're useful," he said. "And useful people work better when they understand the full picture." The friction arrived on day 2, which was faster than I'd expected and slower than it probably should have been given the circumstances. It came in the form of a man named Pete Alderman, who was 53, who had arrived at the community center the previous evening with his adult son and a truck full of supplies that he had contributed to the common pool, or had been understood by others to have contributed to it, which turned out not to be exactly the same thing. Pete Alderman believed that his truck and its contents constituted a separate equity stake rather than a shared resource, and that decisions affecting those resources should be made with his consent. He believed this calmly and without aggression, which made it harder to address than if he'd been unreasonable. He was making an argument that had internal logic. Garrett heard him out. He was good at this, listening to the full structure of a position before responding, not interrupting, letting the argument complete itself. "You brought what you brought because you wanted to survive," Garrett said when Pete finished. "And surviving here requires the resources to be shared." "I brought what I brought because it's mine," Pete said. "And I've shared it. I'm asking that sharing be a decision I participate in, not a given." "If we establish individual resource sovereignty," Garrett said, not unkindly, "then the next person to arrive who has more than you does the same. And the person after that. And the calculation stops being about survival and starts being about comparative wealth. And that's a competition that ends badly in a sealed building." "So you're saying my consent doesn't count?" "I'm saying the group's survival and your consent are currently in conflict," Garrett said. "And the group's survival has to win." Pete was quiet. His son, mid-20s, watched his father with the expression of someone who'd watched him lose arguments before and was trying to calculate this one's trajectory. Garrett said, "Tell me what you actually need from this arrangement." Pete looked up. He hadn't expected that. "You need to feel like the thing you built and carried and protected has value," Garrett said. "It does. You need to feel like the decision to share it is an act of agency rather than an act of surrender." "It is, and I'll say that publicly if it matters. What you don't need and what we can't give you is veto power over how it's deployed." He waited. "Does that work?" Pete was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My son's name is Marcus. He's good with cars. He'd be useful on your vehicle maintenance team." It was an answer that wasn't a direct answer, but it was the answer that mattered. He was staying, and he was contributing his most valuable resource, which was his son. I was standing near the back of the room during this, and I watched the whole thing from 20 feet away. And afterward, I went back to the generator room and thought about it for the duration of the repair I was completing. Garrett Osei had known exactly what Pete Alderman actually needed before Pete had said a word about it. He'd recognized the emotional architecture of the complaint immediately, and he'd built his response to fit it rather than to win the argument. I'd never seen anyone do that in real time without making it look like a performance. Dara found me in the generator room an hour later. She sat on an upturned bucket and watched me work. "The perimeter team identified a pattern," she said. "The concentrations are higher to the north and east, and they're moving in a general southwest drift. Slowly. Over the last 8 hours, they've moved about 3 blocks in that direction." "Toward us?" "Not directly. But the drift is consistent, and if it continues on the current vector, the density around us increases meaningfully in 36 to 48 hours. "You told Garrett?" "I'm telling you first," she said, "because I wanted to think about it with someone before I formalized it." I set down my screwdriver. "Think then. If the drift is vector consistent, it's not random. Something is drawing or driving the movement. To the north and east, there's the hospital district and the university, which means significant initial population concentration. If there's any kind of acoustic or sensory attractor behavior, the primary source is northeast, and the drift is the output of a pulling force moving outward." She paused. "Yolanda said the transition was 11 minutes. If the hospital had 200 staff and 400 patients, that's 600 new infected in under 3 hours. If each one of those attracts the next 5 contacts, the northeast quadrant of the city is the origin point, and the infected population there is already 3,000 or 4,000. We're sitting southwest of it, and it is drifting toward us." I thought about this for a moment. "We need to tell Garrett," I said. "I know," she said. "I just needed—" She stopped. "To have one conversation first where you're doing the knowing," I said, "instead of handing the knowing over." She looked at me with that evaluating look that had never quite stopped. "Yeah," she said quietly. "That." Garrett's response to the drift analysis was to call a full group meeting within the hour, which told me something important about how he ran the operation. He didn't absorb information and dispense decisions from the top. He distributed the information and let the community participate in the response. 34 people in the main hall, sitting on folding chairs arranged in a rough circle, and Garrett standing in the middle of it, explaining what Dara had calculated. He gave her the credit explicitly. This analysis was done by Dara Torres, who arrived yesterday with 3 hours of direct field observation and built a predictive model from it this morning. The model is sound. Here's what it means for us. He outlined 3 options. Stay and reinforce the perimeter to withstand increased density. Stay and begin active reduction of the threat before it reached maximum concentration. Move, identify a secondary location southwest of the current position, and transfer the group before the density made movement impossible. The room talked for 45 minutes, not chaotically with the structured disagreement of people who understood that their individual preferences were subordinate to the collective problem. Pete Alderman asked 3 substantive questions about the secondary location option, and none of them were obstructive. His son Marcus asked about vehicle capacity for the transfer, which was the right logistical question. A woman named Helen, a retired school teacher who I'd learned over the past day, ran the supply inventory with the precise attention of someone who'd been responsible for other people's children for 30 years, said, "The question nobody's asking is what we do about the people outside who don't know we're here." The room went quiet. "There are people in this city who are alive and stationary," Helen said. "Not mobile, not networked, just sheltered in place, waiting for something to change. If we move without broadcasting our destination, they stay where they are until the drift arrives. Garrett listened to her with the full quality of attention he gave everyone. If we broadcast our destination, he said carefully, we increase our arrival population beyond the secondary location's capacity to support them. I know that, Helen said. I'm not saying it's simple. I'm saying it's the question. The silence after that was the room acknowledging that she was right, and that being right didn't make it easier. I looked at Dara. She was looking at Helen. We leave a trail, Dara said to the room. Like the spray-painted arrows that got me out of a dead stretch of Interstate 12 hours ago. We don't broadcast on frequency. We leave physical markers at decision points so that anyone moving can find where we went. She paused. We can't carry everyone, but we can make it possible for people who are moving to find us. Helen looked at Dara for a moment, then nodded, not with warmth exactly, but with the specific respect of a person recognizing a solution they wish they'd produced themselves. Garrett said, That's the answer. We move southwest, we leave markers, we take everyone we physically can. The decision took 12 minutes of implementation planning after that. Marcus Alderman turned out to have a CDL license and could drive the largest vehicle in the lot, a panel van that had arrived 2 days earlier and been absorbed into the community's fleet. I got assigned to the vehicle prep team. Working beside Marcus in the parking lot, I said, Your father handled that well. My father's handled a lot of things well his whole life, Marcus said, wrestling with the tire pressure gauge. He just doesn't always believe people can see it. I thought about that for the rest of the prep. We moved at 3 a.m, which was Garrett's choice, and it was the right one. The drift behavior Dara had identified was more pronounced during daylight hours, more movement, more responsiveness. At 3 a.m., the streets had their best version of quietude. The infected operating at what Dara had characterized as a reduced threshold, still present and still dangerous, but less actively scanning. 14 vehicles in a loose convoy, intervals of 30 feet, headlights low. Garrett had distributed radio's cheap handheld units from the supply cache on a channel designated exclusively for movement coordination. No unnecessary transmission. I drove third in the convoy with Dara in the passenger seat, Maya behind her. The truck loaded past comfortable with the medical supplies and 3 people from the center who'd been left without vehicle assignment. Their names were Thomas, a grad student, Rebecca, a woman in her 60s who'd arrived with nothing but the clothes she'd been wearing, and a teenager named Luis, who hadn't said more than 11 words in the 24 hours since he'd arrived, but who had quietly and without being asked, helped with every physical task that needed doing. The route was southwest, then south, toward a neighborhood of larger residential properties, where Garrett had identified a compound, 2 adjacent lots, with a main house and a workshop building and a perimeter wall that wasn't complete, but was significant. We went 4 blocks before the first problem. A knot of 15 or 20 infected occupied an intersection that was supposed to be clear per the last perimeter scout the scout had been 40 minutes ago. And the drift had been faster than the modeled rate in this sector. Garrett's voice came over the radio, calm. Perimeter team reports a secondary route, 1 block north. Convoy pivots north at Carlisle. Proceed. The convoy turned. I watched the infected cluster in my peripheral vision as we passed 1 block from them. They were facing the sound of the convoy, but not moving yet. The convoy's speed and the distance to the next intersection were just inside the margin of safety Dara had calculated. And knowing that didn't make it easier to breathe. The convoy reformed heading south on Yale after the detour, and we went 6 blocks without incident. Then the radio crackled. Not Garrett. A different voice, high and scared. Someone please, someone please. We're on the roof of the Walgreens on Lead Avenue. There are 4 of us. Can anyone hear this? The radio frequency we were on was the convoy's designated channel. Someone outside the convoy was broadcasting on it. Garrett came on. We hear you. Stay on this channel. Do not make additional noise. We are passing your area in approximately 8 minutes. What is your roof access? The voice gave a description: interior stairwell. 2nd floor, clear as of 2 hours ago. Garrett made the call in real time without requesting group consensus because there wasn't time. Vehicle 6, Vehicle 7. Peel off at Lead, conduct extraction. Rejoin convoy at the secondary staging point. Everyone else continues. 2 vehicles peeled off. I kept driving. I watched those 2 sets of taillights diverge from the convoy in my rear view. And I felt the specific discomfort of continuing forward while something split off behind me, and I drove. Dara was watching the street with both hands in her lap. He knows those drivers, she said quietly. Yeah, I said. He knows they can do it. Yeah. He couldn't know that about everyone, she said. He had to learn that about those specific people over the past 36 hours and deploy accordingly. He's very good, I said. We got very lucky, she said. Finding him. She paused. You finding me? I drove south on Yale and the convoy moved through the sleeping city, and I didn't say anything in response because what I felt about it was true and I wasn't sure I could say it without saying it wrong. The compound was everything Garrett had described and slightly less than what the description implied, which is honest. It was a defensible position in progress rather than a completed one. The perimeter wall covered 3 sides and stopped at a chain-link fence on the 4th. The main house had 6 rooms and the workshop another 4. The total habitable space for 34 people plus the 4 extracted from the Walgreens roof, plus the 11 additional people who arrived in the 3 hours after us following the physical markers Dara had specified, and deployed 49 people, a number that required the kind of daily logistical management that Garrett started organizing before the last vehicle had fully parked. Marcus completed the perimeter wall on the 4th side over the following 2 days, using materials from the workshop, and a supply run that he and Thomas and I conducted on the 2nd morning. The supply run was the hardest thing I'd done since the rest stop, not because of what we encountered, though we encountered enough, but because the experience of moving through a city that had been a living city 48 hours earlier and was now something different produced an emotional response I didn't have language for, and had to simply carry through the duration of this task. I thought about Nashville while I was driving that supply route. Not with regret exactly, with a specific delayed reckoning of understanding that what I'd been moving away from hadn't been the city. It had been the version of myself who lived there without fully living anywhere. Marcus, in the passenger seat with a length of rebar across his knees, said, "Where are you from?" "Nashville, originally." "Originally," he said. I'd been kind of in transit for a while before this. "Going where?" "West," I said. I didn't have a better answer than that. He was quiet for a moment. "You have one now?" I thought about Garrett organizing 49 people into a functioning structure. I thought about Dara's pointing system for threat assessment and how efficiently we'd integrated it. I thought about Helen asking the question nobody else was asking, and Dara answering it, and the spray-painted markers we'd left on 6 decision points between the community center and this compound, and how 3 separate groups of survivors had followed them in. "I think I have a direction," I said. "That's newer than it sounds." Marcus considered this. "Direction is enough," he said. Destination is for people who aren't paying attention. Yolanda had said something to me through a locked bathroom door. Try harder. She'd said it to a stranger. She'd assessed him in 45 seconds through a closed door in the worst moment of her life, and she'd made a demand of him because she'd decided he was capable of meeting it. I'd been thinking about that since we left that building. Not with guilt, which would have been easier. With the specific discomfort of being seen clearly by someone at the moment you least expected it, and finding that the image they'd formed was more generous than the one you'd been carrying of yourself. Try harder. Not you're failing, just you're capable of more than this, and I know it. And now you know I know it. We completed the supply run. We brought back what we'd set out for. We came back to a compound with 49 people in it, who were, on balance, still alive and organized and moving toward functional. Dara met me at the vehicle. She'd been working the perimeter assessment all morning, and she had notes, actual paper notes, written in the small, precise handwriting of someone who'd been educated on the value of external record. The northwest approach is the weakest, she said. We should discuss it with Garrett before tonight. Okay, I said. Also, she said, and stopped. She looked at me with the audit that had been running since Adrian, Texas, and for the first time, I could see something in it that had resolved rather than continued to evaluate. You came into the city with me, she said. You didn't have to. I know, I said. Yolanda would have wanted me to. She stopped again, and this time the stopping was different. Not managing information, just holding something close for a moment before it became the past. She would have wanted me to tell you that. Tell me what? I said quietly. That you came when it mattered, Dara said, even without a reason. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then, I had a reason. You said you didn't. I said I didn't have anywhere else to be. That's different. I looked at the compound, at the people moving inside it, at Marcus already explaining something structural to his father near the unfinished fourth wall. I had a reason. I just didn't know it was one yet. She looked at me for one last long moment. Then she opened her notebook and pointed to the northwest approach. Let's go talk to Garrett, she said. I still sleep in the truck sometimes. Not because I have to. There are rooms in the compound now, and I have one, and it has 4 walls and a door that locks. I sleep in the truck sometimes because it's the place where the story started, and I haven't decided yet what to do with the man I was inside it. He was nobody, that man. No destination, no tether. Moving west because forward was less honest than stopping, and stopping required a reason he hadn't earned. The alert woke him up. The man in the parking lot started him moving. Dara gave him a direction. Yolanda gave him a demand. Garrett gave him a place. Marcus gave him a word for what he'd found. Direction, not destination. Direction is for people who are paying attention. I'm paying attention now. To the 49 people in this compound, and the ones still following markers in from the outside. To Dara's perimeter notes and Garrett's organizational logic. And Helen asking the questions nobody else asks. And Luis doing every physical task without being told. I'm paying attention to what it means to be somewhere instead of passing through it. The truck still runs. I keep it fueled. Not to leave to be capable of the difference between leaving and staying. So that staying is always a choice rather than a default. Yolanda said, try harder. Through a locked door. To a stranger. I'm trying. That's the whole story, and it's also just the beginning of one. Thank you for listening.